Seafood Boggie here, and welcome to another show of The Way of Conscious Mindfulness, a show about mind, body, and spirit, balancing spirituality and science on many different topics. And this show is a little bit different to the normal. Oh, okay, that's me, I think. Oh, okay, that's me, I think. Stand most. Right, where's the speaker?
Get it, Boggie. Get the speaker. Get it good. Get that speaker.
Right, okay, that's done. I know they've changed it on YouTube. I can't find the speakers. I've just had to turn it off. Right, so this show is different to normal, but we have three co-hosts. So myself, we have, as always, the gracious, the wonderful, the ever so mystic and intelligent and can't stop talking, just like myself, Ethan, and also today we have a special co-host, one of my students learning Shunchi Shen, or also known as Dragon Dog Reiki, and also a student of one of my students who's now a teacher, and he's learning Qigong. So Chris, say hi.
Hello.
He's man a few words, but when he does string some words together, he asks some very interesting questions. So this show, you co-hosts, and this show, if I can get back to YouTube and stick YouTube on, hopefully I can get some questions from you guys as well as you start popping up. But this show is actually about sacred violence. Now, I know there'll be a few spiritual people out there, or a few people in general, that might be turning in a certain direction, or, well, sacred violence? What do you mean sacred violence? Well, it's a very interesting topic. It rolls around in many different things. You'll find it in many different things. With children, in sports, in martial arts, in Tai Chi, in pushing hands. But what we'll do, I'll ask the great Ethan, what is sacred violence? Over to you, my friend.
Okay, I will try and keep this blather session under 10 minutes, but I make no promises. So, sacred violence. I would have to say the easiest explanation for me of sacred violence is the compassion that nature shows through violence. Now that looks to me, and when you see it manifest in the form of Mother Nature doesn't allow animals to become incredibly sick or incredibly old and feeble. She takes care of that. She sends in her cleanup crew. And the first wave of her cleanup crew, for let's say it's like a great example is a herd of elk or any pack animal that is a herbivore, is preyed on by wolves, for instance. So when an elk gets sick or gets old, rather than it suffering for years on end like humans do and we put our pets through, Mother Nature's form of compassion, which we don't necessarily see as compassion and we don't necessarily understand as compassion, and in my opinion, a lot of that has to do with our obsession with keeping everything alive because we're afraid of things dying because that will equal change, and generally humans fear change. So we see this manifest as a form of compassion. So violence, because in nature you can't have one without the other. You can't have the summer without the winter. You can't have the spring without the fall. There is always balance. Mother Nature always creates balance, and there is always duality. To deny a piece of that would be to deny a basic element of the universe itself, which generally, in my experience, when you do that, bad things end up happening. You end up in a state of dis-ease. The root of the word says it all. So with that in mind, many cultures throughout time have honored sacred violence and the pain of existing. The Lakota and Dakota tribes during their Sundance Festival will have sacred clowns that are going around making people, not making, but stimulating people to laugh. And at the same time, you have the Braves who are dragging, I think it's like 1 to 3, sometimes more even, buffalo skulls behind them on a piece of sinew with a little bit of cherry wood that's been driven through a fold of skin on their back. And they drag them around until they rip out. Because you need to create the balance. You need to create that totality. Because without that totality, then you're out of balance, and that leads to dis-ease. And that's, in my opinion, why you see so many people so prevalent today. You see you see this manifest in the Buddhists, where the Buddhists are very loving and very compassionate. However, if you try to take their life, they will defend themselves, because ultimately, if you look at nature, that's how nature works. Deer don't go around looking for people to gore with their antlers. But if you attack a deer, it will defend itself because it knows that its life is sacred and it wants to defend its life. So with that in mind, you see this great duality in life. Now, the problem comes in when you have violence that's used out of context. Violence that comes not from a need to survive, but a need to control, a need to try and make yourself safe in a situation where you don't need to be safe. So you see that manifest all over the world in all of these wars of autonomy that people have because they don't feel safe. So you see countries going to war with other countries because their opinions are different and they feel threatened by other people's opinions. And so because of that, there's so much excess violence in the world that it's become very sensitive for a lot of people and become a very strong trigger for a lot of people. So you see people have an aversion to violence, where if you go and you spend a lot of time in a martial arts school, violence becomes love. Because ultimately, you're learning to be violent. Your friends are being violent towards you. The people in your school are being violent towards you. So that way you can defend yourself against a violent person who will not show you mercy, who will not show you compassion like your friends will in these situations. So ultimately, in those situations, you are training yourself to defend yourself. I believe even Mahatma Gandhi commented once on how to not defend yourself if you're being attacked. There's pacifism. There's not reacting in anger and lashing out at people, but to allow yourself to be a victim isn't going to do anything good for the world. All that it's going to do is just increase that power for the negative. So sacred violence is something that is very not understood in our culture. Ancient cultures understood it much better than us. You look at, great example would be the Aztecs. They had a game that was a lot like basketball, and whoever the team that won, the captain of that team would be sacrificed, because to them, they recognized the greater cycles in life, the planting, the death and rebirth cycle that you see in a lot of the planting cultures. Not so much the hunting cultures have a different take on it. But you see it most prevalently in the planting cultures, where they recognize that this grass will grow again. This energy will return. So ultimately, an act of violence is just a part of nature. And I mean, let's take another great example. Think about a carrot, right? So science has officially proven, thank God, that plants have feelings. What do you think you're doing to a plant when you're chewing it up? I don't think that plant's having a good time getting jammed into your mouth and getting chewed into little tiny pieces. I find that to be a form of violence, personally. So destruction and destruction and creation are inevitably linked. Even with your breath, you breathe in, you're absorbing oxygen. You're taking the oxygen molecules out of the air and taking them into your body. So you're creating a small amount of destruction. You breathe out. Now, in the bigger scheme of things, then the tree does the opposite. It breathes in what you're breathing out, so it creates a larger cycle. So ultimately, I believe that if you look at violence as without its totality, without the complete, thinking about how it will come back again, the life will return, ultimately you end up with a lot of problems. And also, violence is used in a lot of contexts these days that is not appropriate. There is an awful lot of non-sacred violence out there in the world that is mucking it up for the sacred violence, basically. because people are becoming overloaded and oversensitive to the violence, because in nature there's not as much violence. And that gets into consensual violence. And consensual violence is the violence of two stags who are fighting over a female. If one of them backs down, the battle's over. It's not a matter of the other deer is going to be like, hey, I'm going to kill you because I feel threatened by you because you're competition. When the conflict, they both agree to go into conflict. And when the conflict is over, they both go their separate ways, leaving the violence behind, leaving the conflict behind. Deepak Chopra says that an emotion lasts no more than 45 seconds to a minute in your body unless you start telling yourself a story about it. So if you feel angry, that is your body bringing up energy to defend yourself for 45 seconds. If that continues, that means you're telling yourself a story about how that person was wrong. They shouldn't have done that. Whatever the case may be, this is what proliferates violent thinking. This is what proliferates that form of consciousness in our culture and in many cultures. And you look at cultures that don't have, and it all comes down to language. The works of Marshall Rosenberg are very profound in this regard. You look at, he's studied cultures and their language patterns, and you find that in cultures where there's certain cultures, it's impossible to tell someone that they're selfish. You can say, I feel that you're focusing on your needs a lot, and I would like you to focus on the needs of others. There's no shame. There's no blame. You're just saying how you feel. So in these cultures, you see an extreme lack of violence that you see in the Western cultures that are based on the shaming, on the telling somebody that they're wrong, on making the moralistic judgments. Because you can make judgments about things. You know, obviously it's not optimal to put your hand into a fire because you need judgment. That's what the monkey mind is for, is to help you get through your day, because otherwise you're not going to have any discernment. The problem is when people become wholly identified with that judgment, when they decide that you are doing this thing wrong, so it is my right to punish you, to fix this problem by punishing you. And I mean, you even see it, like, look at road rage. What do you do when you get mad on the road? You go, you idiot! You're trying to incur shame in this person. You're an idiot. You're stupid for driving in this way that I don't approve of. So you see this as a result. So as a result of that, you see violence manifest to extreme levels in our culture. I mean, look at Hollywood. Show me a Hollywood movie where the bad guy doesn't get beaten up in the end. Even in romantic comedies, a lot of the times the bad guy will get socked in the face. He won't go to jail. He won't go to prison, but some negative thing will happen to the perceived bad person who really, if you want to look at it technically, is only living how they were taught to try and get their needs met, which is a very suboptimal way. So all this pertains to violence in that violence starts as a thought, and then it becomes manifest. And the context of the violence changes all, in my opinion, because if you've ever done martial arts, you will know that there's a lot of the feeling when your friend is trying to punch you in the head compared to when there's a drunk, angry person trying to punch you in the head. The feeling tone is completely different. So violence can be sacred. Violence is sacred. It is just a horribly misused tool. It's like hallucinogenics. There's a lot of people out there who are taking hallucinogenics who want to see some pretty colors and have a good time and get way too carried away and overdose and can die because of it. Where if they were taken in the context that they were, I believe, intended by spirit to be taken in, they are an amazingly powerful tool to shake up your consciousness, to help free you from the hologram for a little while so you can remember who you are on a baseline.
And that's another form of sacred.
Yeah, I'm not going there.
Yeah. I was going to say, let's stick with the sacred violence at least for a little while.
Okay.
So
I'll pass the torch to somebody.
Chris,
I'll violently pass the torch here. Violently pass the torch.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've got my version and my what I'd like to add to that. But first, I want to ask Chris. It's sort of the. Actually, sort of the co-host of the co-hosts. You know, you are the one who could ask. Have you got questions? That's what I'm trying to say. Have you any questions to what Ethan has already said? Anything you'd like to ask or add?
I do have a couple of questions in mind.
Cool.
So, like with the Aztec example that you gave, about talking about sacrificing a human life, and I think a lot of people might be upset with using that example, especially when it's taken in such a cherry-picked way. Because if you consider the Aztecs killed hundreds of people for far less balanced reasons, shall we say, how would you answer that question?
I would ultimately say that, as with everything and anything, there is no perfect human. There is no perfect culture. So they're all. I mean, here's another great example of something that I find to be personally pretty heinous. Is there's a culture, I can't remember where they're from. As part of their rite of passage, they would get all of the young men they would make a hut, and they would put the hut up on large pillars, and then they would take a young maiden, and she would go and lay there, and all the young men would go and copulate with her until the last young man was copulating with her, and they reached their conclusion. Then they would rip the pillars of the hut out. The hut would fall on them, crushing them to death, and then they would set it on fire, and then would cook them and eat them as part of their process of absorbing the greater. And all of these have creation stories. So with myths are the guidelines for society. That's why, for instance, when you look at like the Roman myths and the Greek myths, you'll see gods raping people, because that's what they wanted to be able to do in their culture. Because whatever your gods do is socially acceptable for you to do, according to the laws of mythology. So you look at these cultures, and these cultures have mythology about, I think it was the Aztecs. They have the mythology about corn, where the origin of corn, where corn comes from. And the myth goes, I'm paraphrasing, but basically there was a young man who was walking along one day, and another young man came up to him and said, "Wrestle me." And they wrestled, and the young man who was walking along won. And this happened several days in a row. And then at the end, the young man who kept challenging him said, "I want you to kill me after we finish this wrestling match, and bury me." And he did. And from where that young man was buried, corn grew. So you see that as a representation of the cycle of life, that death turns into life, and that is the cycle of creation. So I told the horrible story about the sacrifice, because there is no perfect wisdom. There is no culture that has it perfectly figured out. We look at, I believe it's one of the flaws of the spiritual community now, we look at the ancient tribes and we think that they had it all figured out. They didn't have it all figured out. The Aborigines, they had a lot of shit right. But, like as a part of a rite of passage, genital mutilation is quite often a rite of passage for young men in a lot of cultures like that, because there has to be something that will take the young man out of being a boy and turn him into a man, and there's no way that he can go back. So if that's, lopping off the foreskin is a great example, then that's something that they do. I don't agree with that. I don't approve of genital mutilation personally. I think it's rather horrifying of a concept to rob a man of 2/3 of the nerve endings in the end of his penis. But you see that as something that's manifest. So, with the Aztec, ultimately, their attitude towards life is based on their belief that life isn't really going anywhere. It's just being reborn. The corn grows back. The life grows back. If someone dies, their energy will be reborn. That energy will come back, and you see it in Native American myths and like the hunting myths. A lot of the hunting myths about like the buffalo, and there's a lot of cultures that will I can't remember which one it is. They whenever they would kill a bear, they would take the skull of the bear and have a feast and feed part of the bear to itself to represent giving back to what has been taken, to that cycle, honoring that cycle of life, death, rebirth. So ultimately, I feel that it's really hard for us to be able to even grasp that consciousness that the Aztecs had, because we are so far removed from that concept of the rebirth cycle, of that. We are so far removed from, because in Western culture, death is the end. And not only is death the end, but look at how we handle death. When someone dies, they get stuffed into a black bag, shipped off to a mortuary. If you can't go into a mortuary, at least in the United States, unless you've gone through college training, you can only, like, there's a certain place legally you're not allowed to go past. We have this thing of death where we hide it away. We're obsessed with youth. Where look at the cultures in, like, the Tibetan cultures, where they put the bodies of their loved ones out to feed nature, because they recognize that cycle. You know, Buddhist monks will go and meditate in morgues on mortality and immortality, because, you know, like, life, one of my favorite sayings is, life is sexually transmitted and always fatal. So we can't really, but we like to pretend that it's not. We like to pretend that we'll live forever. Like, a great example I heard not too long ago is an ad for life insurance. If the worst happens and you die, you're gonna die. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You can't get out of the game alive. But we like to think that we can. So a great example that Joseph Campbell uses in his book, The Power of Myth, is I think it was in Canada, there were tribes where if a young brave was captured, he would be tortured to death. But that was a rite of passage. That was an extremely spiritual experience that young brave would go to. So you have the Puritans were up there when they were first invading or colonizing, depending on what context you want to look at it in. And they observed this behavior and they thought it was barbaric. They thought it was horrible because the people who were going to be torturing this young brave were excited for him. Were joyful that this being was going to go through this experience. And the Puritans found this barbaric and horrifying. Now, that's all state of context. That's all because if you look at it from a different perspective, if you look at it from this perspective of sacred violence, where violence loses, where you're not afraid of violence, that's something that we're very afraid of in our culture. We're very afraid of violence. Even, you know, hunters get disdain from a lot of people in our culture because they're violent towards animals. You know, so you see this lack of understanding of the nature of violence. So for me, and I felt this way, I would like to say that for a long time, I didn't understand the Aztecs. I thought they were a brutal, horrible culture that just did awful things to people. And then I studied them some, and I read some books about mythology, and I came to the conclusion that I am not capable of understanding their mindset to the level that they did because I was not raised in their culture. So I have this fear of death because I was raised in Western culture that they don't have or didn't have at the time when all this was going down, because to them it was just the next part of life. It wasn't a death, it was just a rebirth. It wasn't the end, it was a pause. So that's my lengthy response.
I just want to add to that is I know the Aztecs. I know of some of the other ancient cultures because my teacher my Sifu made a big thing about me knowing this. Was in the ancient cultures, their viewpoint was totally different. And what I mean by that is their understanding of the ancient knowledge, their understanding. And you hear it in certain places. If you're very much into spiritual stuff, you will hear this said, and people sort of say it, but I'm not sure how much they actually get what they're saying. What I'm referring to is that everything is alive, and you are immortal. Your consciousness lives over again. So in these ancient cultures, you know, especially like with the American Indians, it's one of their big things, is that when you die, it's all it is the closing of one book, the end of one chapter. But you live many chapters. You live over and over again, which is very prominent in the Buddhist and Taoist culture, in the whole philosophy, is that reincarnation is a constant thing. Now, I know it's not quite, or at first it doesn't appear to be about sacred violence, but the whole point is that when you're afraid of violence, if you think of life as so precious that that's it, You know, life is precious. Don't get me wrong. Everything is precious. Hence why originally you had the blessings. You know, when the ancient cultures, like the American Indians, the Taoists, all these ancient cultures, when they hunt, which is violence, they're going to hunt. When they kill something, they would first, as soon as they've killed it, they would bless it. They would thank it for its life. They would do the blessing, sacred blessing. And the whole point of, you know, in essence, where Thanksgiving comes from, the end, or where, you know, in especially cultures, they, you know, do a blessing on their food, is this whole process of they would bless the food when they've hunted it, but then they would, before cooking, you'll get another blessing, and then after cooking, when you go to eat it, get another blessing. Now, what most people know that about the livestock, the food, the meat, but what a lot of people miss, they did exactly the same, especially in the Buddhist and Taoist cultures. They do exactly the same with vegetation, life, because all is life. Because when you die, which is the natural process, you die and you come back. You can't. Now in Buddhism, they have like a set structure. Well, depends which levels. There's different sects of Buddhism, but some of them have a set structure of, you know, if you're good, you go up a level, and if you're bad, you go down a level. And one of the versional sects of Buddhism, called known as lower vehicle Buddhism, or at least to my seeing, was that, you know, these Buddhists were so nervous about stepping on grass because it could be their ancestors, and if they step on the grass, then the next life they'll come back as an ant. So, you know, they're very wary about what things they do. But the point is that if in your knowledge, I don't like belief, but in your knowledge, if you know that there is reincarnation, then violence stops being violence in a certain degree. Now, this thing of martial arts, you know, Ethan did mention it. Most people, you say, what's martial arts? They say, oh, that's fighting. The funny thing is, when you truly get into martial arts, fighting is like the cherry on top of the cake. You know, there's so much more. There's the whole point of the training, of the practice. Oh, am I back?
Yes.
Yeah, you're here.
Right. It phased on mine. So there's so much of the training, of the practice, and that is what Ethan's talking about as sacred violence. Is that the practice, the training is, you know, this whole thing of interacting with another being. You're learning now in Tai Chi, which Chris knows a little bit more about. In Tai Chi, you've got a thing called Xiao Shu, which is pushing hands. Now, it's also called sensitivity training, and the idea is that you're listening, your partner, your opponent, if you want to use that word. Where in hard martial arts, they would say opponent. In soft martial arts, they tend to say your partner, because it's the yin to your yang in this sense. So there's this interaction. The whole point, let me find it, the whole point of this is the interaction between yin and yang. And this should be moving, and it should be circling around. And this would be, therefore, the interaction of yin and yang. So it will be a play, a form of sacred violence. And as Ethan said himself, within society, you know, within nature, you have hurricanes, you have storms. These are ways of nature clearing the char, clearing away things. And as Ethan also said, in nature itself, you also have, you know, different animals will, in their mating rituals, they'll, you know, fight against another male. That is sacred violence. It's the whole point, you know, the sacredness, you know, the violence is the action, the play. And the problem with sports, we sort of lost that. We've sort of lost, or I've noticed more and more, like one thing in American football, I know there's a big thing recently that people would, go to do prayers, before a big game. And in certain areas in America, if I've got this right, I'm sure Ethan will tell me if I got it wrong. Certain areas in America, they're actually banning the prayers before the game, and so you're taking away the sacredness of the violence, the sacredness of that action, because you're opening up, you're learning from that situation. And for a Taoist point of view, everyone and everything is your Sifu. That means everything you do is an opportunity to learn, to experience. So that's why the violence is sacred, because you can learn from it. There are things to learn. Like when you talk to people, you learn about them. So the same is in martial arts. Sparring with somebody is basically xiao shu, is push hands. Is this, you're listening, you're learning from that person. And there is this great, in the martial arts, there's this great thing about that a party will come through the way they perform martial arts. So whether it's sword play or whether it's hand-to-hand combat, a personality will shine through. So somebody has a far more aggressive, maybe slightly selfish personality, that will transform in their movements, that will be translated within the movement. So they'll attack in a very aggressive manner. If they're far more about pushing forwards, they may attack far more than they actually defend. If somebody is a great thinker, you will see the strategy, you will see them taking a step back, you will see them working things out, you will see them giving themselves time. And the red thing in Tai Chi is this whole thing of time, stepping back in the void, coming back, allowing yourself to think. So these are all strategies. These are all opportunities to learn from this so-called violence. Hence, why it becomes sacred violence, because it's as important as everything else we do. It is that if you don't have this opportunity to let off steam, if you don't have this opportunity to have fun, to play, to tussle, in whichever level you choose for you, then you actually become stagnant. There's this interesting thing. My Sifu, there was a commune that he went to in the 70s. And they're all very much into meditation and whatnot, but then he stayed there for a while and he noticed the bickering, and he noticed the like one person's that person had more lentils than me, or there was little things, little comments, little things, and he turned round to the main leader and said, you're lacking play. You're lacking fighting. You should be doing pushing hands. And at first, it's we don't tolerate violence here. And I said, that is not violence. Violence is. But his version, or his thought of violence. Violence is action with no means, no ends. For no reason. So a martial artist, he would not consider a violent person in the as violence, hitting somebody. But if you're doing it because you have to, because that person's giving you no choice, then you're reacting to a situation. If you're sparring with somebody, then it's not violence, it's play, as far as he was concerned. And I sort of go that same way with martial arts. People who don't understand martial arts see it as a violent thing. People who understand martial arts see decent martial arts, balanced martial arts, Taoist martial arts, the way, the path, the balance. When they are balanced, it is about personal development, and you learn personal development through the body, which would be, in this essence, sacred violence. The mind, through emotions, having fun, partying or just playing with people. And the spirit in Taoism is thought, so conversation, that's intellectualness. So it's this balance of all the three. Now I'm going to stop rambling, and firstly, Chris. So, is there any questions you would like to ask, or anything you would like to, any statements yourself you'd like to add to this conversation?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's so much information coming out. It's like, okay, so I'm going to try to absorb a lot of this. But I mean, one of the things that does come to mind is that both you and Ethan, sacred violence seems to be boxed or misrepresented as a phrase to cover the most extreme examples of sacred violence. And you've now painted it with a much broader canvas, as it were, of what that violence can be. But I'm still having trouble with the word sacred being in front of violence, and I don't know why.
I would, if I had to make a guess, I would say that we're all traumatized by violence. We've all been traumatized by violence. The misuse of violence, the misuse of force. It's like anger. Anger is a really good example. Anger is a very powerful emotion that is there to get you out of a really shitty situation. Like somebody comes up and does something to you that you would prefer that they hadn't done, and you become angry about it. That anger is there to generate power, to generate the ability to survive, to get you out of a really scary situation. Same as violence, or the same as, what's another good example? Like something like a really powerful stimulant. There's a time and a context. Like I don't drink coffee, but I will drink coffee maybe once a year when I'm trying to get home from a trip somewhere and I really want to get home and I don't want to stop on the side of the road and sleep. I will drink coffee even though I know that it's going to get my nervous system all sorts of jacked up. It's going to basically be telling my body that it's being chased by a lion, which is why so many people get like all sorts of messed up when they drink coffee for prolonged periods of time, because that's what you're telling your body. So we all have trauma that we have to overcome. So there are words that and concepts that we've been extremely traumatized by in our culture, and every culture has their own thing that they've been traumatized by. And I think for us in the West, violence is very much something that we've all been traumatized by. It's something that we've all very much been subjected to against our will. And I believe that humans instinctively know what is good for them and what is not good for them, or optimal and suboptimal, if you don't want to get into moralistic judgments, if you just want to look at it that way. So like a couple examples I'll cite of like the collective unconscious, right? Or the Akashic records, all the records of Earth. We instinctively know that that's there, and we instinctively know that that's missing. So what do? We create the internet, which has access to a crap load of information that we can't access because we're cut off from it. We know it's there, we know we want it, but we can't access it. Joseph Campbell points out a fantastic example of how people will throw themselves on a grenade without a second thought to defend someone else, or throw themselves in front of a car to save a complete stranger. Why is that? Joseph Campbell theorizes, and I completely agree, that it's because subconsciously we still remember that we are all one. So we are ultimately trying to defend a piece of ourself. When someone jumps in front of a car to save someone else's life, you're trying to defend a piece of yourself because we are all one. We are all connected. We are all related. So with that in mind, I feel that we all have collective trauma. For men in Western culture, we have the collective trauma of weakness. We can't be weak. We can't be girly. We can't be this, if you have long hair, that makes you girly, and that makes you weak, which makes you vulnerable, which means that society did a really good job of the chicken idea I grew up with chickens. One chicken starts picking on another chicken, then all the other chickens join in. They're not even sure why they're picking on this chicken, but they're doing it. So you see that with weakness in men. Men are, if you're a girly man, other men will mock you for it. So this just to illustrate forms of trauma that we're given. And for women are told to put their needs aside, aside so that way they can serve others, their children and their family. So that's collective trauma that women have. So I believe that in the West especially, we have a lot of collective trauma about violence because violence has been so misused, has been run rampant for so long in a very unhealthy context that has caused us all a lot of pain. And so the idea of something sacred, to me, when I think of the word sacred, I think the first things that come to mind are love and light and compassion, and things of that nature, which goes completely against my relationship to the word violence. And when I think of the word violence, I instantly think of blood and swords and pain. And this is all just for me, my interpretation. My relationship to that word of violence makes sacred violence on the initial inspection something that to me doesn't belong together. Something that is almost an abomination of what I was originally trained to consider holy and loving. It's like the idea that you can love someone and try and hurt them. Like, let's look at one of my favorite examples is in Israel. They practice an art called Krav Maga, a martial art called Krav Maga. And everyone in Israel, unless they have changed it in the last couple of years, is required to serve 1 or 2, I think 2-year term in the army. So while you're in the army, you are dealing with people who will shiv you with nail files, like a nail file, for filing your nails, a metal one, wrap the handle in tape and then try and put that between your ribs when nobody's looking. So Krav Maga, they beat the living fuck out of each other. And why do they do that? Because if they don't, you're not going to survive on the street. You're not going to survive. So they love you and they are trying to hurt you so that way you can ultimately survive. And you see that very prevalently, in my opinion, in the native cultures, where the brave a young brave, from his passage from becoming a boy to a man, will be tortured to a certain extent because he needs to be able to survive that. And you also see that prevalent in torture training, where and you see this in a lot of martial arts, where the training hurts way more than a fight ever could. Because then you're prepared to deal with the fight. You're prepared to deal with whatever life throws at you. If you have been through hell, nothing can scare you anymore. Nothing can faze you anymore. So to me, this relationship that we have with violence and the word sacred and the love there, it seems very counterintuitive. And I'm going to blame society because that's what we do here in America.
Indeed.
Yes. So that's my response. I hope that helps. Does it help, Chris? I would love to.
It certainly makes me see things in a different light. I think that was a really good explanation of the two opposites. You're right that you have the light and the candles and happy place, sunshine and rainbows, and then
totally.
You've got blood and gore on the other side,
and hugging and all of that stuff. But then they go out into the world and they get eaten alive by the world. And to me, I try to base everything. I try to double check everything with nature, because I don't think that nature fucked up. I think that nature's got its shit together pretty well. Obviously, it's continued working for a long ass time, and so I try to double check theories and beliefs and that sort of thing with nature and see how nature responds and see how nature does things, because ultimately we're one of many players in this game of life. And so it doesn't make sense to me that that God's spirit creator would make a heinous error. Because so far, I haven't seen any heinous errors in the universe. The universe seems pretty fucking well put together to me. Like how our bodies work and how we interact and all of that stuff. It seems like a pretty brilliant theory. So it's like black holes. I was just talking to somebody about this. I'm going to divert for a second. I was just talking about this with somebody the other day, talking about black holes, and people feel that black holes is like an ultimate destruction and there's nothing on the other side of the black hole. I haven't seen that anywhere in the universe. I don't see that manifest anywhere else, because you got the microcosm, macrocosm, that, we are little universes. We have thousands of little beings living in our intestines and all that sort of thing. So I have a hard time believing that the universe would make something that is so far out of alignment with all of the other principles of the universe that it would actually cause complete destruction. I believe that it might destroy us if we went through a black hole, or that we're not capable of understanding what's on the other side of the black hole, the same as we're not necessarily capable of understanding the greater scheme of how the universe works. But I don't think
black hole
it makes mistakes. What, Boggie?
Well, just wanted to add the whole thing. We're saying about the black hole. Well, that's because we're on one side. We only can see one side of the black hole, and I truly believe, we as a we can't even get to the blooming black hole yet. So if we could get to it and we had the technology, and I believe it is the technology to get through the black hole, you would see another side, because, as you say, everything else has this flow between one or the other. When you in quantum physics, and I love quantum physics, and you go into the whole Torah nature, they are finding the whole, energy coming up and around underneath. In blood cells, you will find a toridic nature. You go down to the atoms and the quarks. When in the atom, you'll find like a solar system. Like the atom itself is, you've got a central point, a central part, and then all this space around the outside. But it's this whole flowing nature of the universe itself. It's toridic. It flows. So just, we to say, that's totally destructive. How do you know? Because if Einstein, unless of course you think Einstein is wrong, then that's another point of view. But one of the things Einstein said was energy cannot be destroyed, can only be transformed. So it goes from one thing to another. So, sort of bringing it back, in essence, using that and bringing it back to sacred violence, the whole thing of, the violence of a storm, the nature. A storm only lasts so long, and then it goes back to calmness. My name, Boggie, when said the Korean way, is the balance between chaos and calmness. It's the calmness and the calmness, the gi, and the both, the chaos, the storm, and the calmness before or after the storm, or the hurricane and the eye itself. Is that, you need both. There has to be the both. And so this, so with, with the thing with what Chris said, he's still struggling with the word, sacred. It is this whole thing of putting two, especially in the West, two very opposite words and putting them together. But here's another one for you: sacred sexuality or sacred sex. A lot. I don't know so much about it in America, but especially in the UK, sex is still a very taboo subject. Now, there is a Taoist system, that Taoist sexual yoga, and people very much suddenly caught into this and gone a big thing into it. And sacred sex is again, everything is technically sacred. Everything is your sifu, and everything is sacred. So especially like a Taoist concept is, and even the Buddhists say it, is everything is sacred, from the sky to the ground, from a beautiful butterfly to dog shite. Everything is sacred, because that dog shite, add to something else, or manure, you add to something else, and it helps the flowers grow. Those beautiful flowers have come from shite. The earth is full of dead stuff, all things that were once something else. Oil is the dead bodies of past creatures, past animals. So violence exists and is part of nature, and therefore you should seek and find the sacred of that nature. Just like another mind twister, so I say you've got sacred violence, you've got sacred sex, sacred food, or another way, the way the Taoists say, the Chinese say, food is medicine. And you watch people's little heads, their little brains, what? Food is medicine. You can flip it one way or the other. We know this now even more so, because when food is heavily altered and refined and processed, that is not good medicine for you over a long period of time. So the whole point, everything is sacred. You're sacred. Your body is sacred. One of my associates, the Barefoot Doctor, aka Stephen Russell. One of the things, there's that saying that the body is a temple. Your body is a temple, and there was a very similar Taoist saying, and he says it in a slightly more fun, more modern way. He says, my body's a temple. At night time, my body's a nightclub. So it's the idea, to appreciate things. And this is the thing about me, and with you and I, this show and my vlogs. I've had one or two people say, "Oh, you don't, those cartoons at the beginning, they're disrespectful with the information." No, they're actually respectful of the information. Don't take yourself or anything else too seriously, but at the same time, love it and appreciate it.
Well, it's a denial of the self. If you deny the self, then you're going to cause problems. So if you deny your sexuality, if you deny that you're horny, you're breaking the whole. And we see this.
This is the problem.
What'd you say?
This is the problem with this whole thing of we're talking about, which is really, you're trying to Google sacred violence.
It comes up with a book. You've got it. It's some book from the 70s that's all about how the world's going to hell because it's so violent.
Well, but the problem is it's the wrong kind of violence. That's the problem. Is that the violence has lost its sacredness. It's the fun. It's no fun in, if you have fun in fighting, it's not fighting, it's play. And that's the point. It's like, but even with that, we say play fighting. So we have this play, and then because we've made fighting such a bad, naughty word, you're sort of mucking the two together. But the whole point is that, well, I'll put it this way. Ethan has made these wonderful hammers, and Chris, you were at Colours of the Oak, which is a spiritual pagan camp, and we had a warhammer competition, didn't we?
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Exactly. But the point is because me and Baz were doing it, the whole idea is it was, without us saying it was sacred violence. The whole idea was this Warhammer is to have fun and play, but there were rules involved, as in don't kill each other, don't. The whole idea of the refs is go, we had it on a point system, so it's hits. So the idea is you can only take it to a certain point. So the whole point of the sacred violence is appreciating what it's actually for. When you take away the sacredness, you only get violence, and that's the problem in society. Is that and the whole thing of when people don't understand martial arts, they they hear the word martial arts and say it's all about fighting. So no, true martial artists, as I've said already, fighting is the cherry on top of the cake. In Taoism, is that you learn fighting styles. In wartime, it's about fighting. So Tai Chi is about fighting in wartime. But in peacetime, it's about fitness. It's about improving your body. It's about health. In peacetime, massage is about healing. But in wartime, massage is actually nerve strikes, or acupressure is healing in peacetime, and in wartime, it's nerve strikes, demuk, death touch. Massage is grappling. It's holding different muscles and tendons, causing pain. Because if you're forced into a situation where there is war, then you need to react. But in peacetime, these same things become something else entirely. So this whole point of this sacred violence is appreciating what it's worth. It is a sifu. It is a tool, a teacher to learn from and to be used. And I think, where, this book is, it's too much violence. So actually, it's just the wrong sort of violence. And in some areas, like Shun, when he went to that commune back in the 70s, is that if you don't have the right sort of energy in something, you'll create stagnation. Yeah, I was trying to create Boggieism then. You'll create stagnation. And so therefore, you have to have the right mix. Now, the other way around that, or part of it, is actually dance. But the whole point of dance, when you truly look at dance, you have, I know Ethan's heard of it, I don't know about Chris, and I don't know about the audience, but there's a martial art, which sort of isn't, but it is a martial art, but it isn't a martial art, called capoeira. Now, capoeira to the novice will look like a dance, but it's almost like it's almost like a stuntman dance, where the aim of capoeira is to get to close as the partner as possible without hitting them. So the kicks, so they'll kick, and a bit like the Matrix, they bend back. Or they bend forwards. So the whole point of capoeira is that they are fighting each other to music. Now the history of that was basically I can't remember where it comes from. I want to say Brazil, but I know somebody will correct me. So where it originates from, the slave trade, they banned all violence. So what they did, they created this dance system, this capoeira. So they did it to music, and they would sway to side, and then they would do these punches or these kicks. And the whole idea was that you would move from side to side, and you would get as close as you could to that person without actually hitting them. So it became a sacred dance that in its actions stimulated or simulated, I should say, violence. And then you look at certain dance styles, like the rock and the jives, or like the very soulful, the bump and the grind. You're getting very close and into those people. They have movements. They have actions that you twist it slightly and it could become a fighting move. There's definitely in the East, there's lots of the fan forms. You see lots of beautiful Chinese women dancing in different ways with the fans, or doing different styles. And again, originally these were martial art moves. These were fighting forms, and those moves have actually been interpreted into a dance form. And there was a friend of yours and mine, Chris's, Sharon, and Shaz, I should say. Don't call her Sharon, Shaz. And she would say, is that I do this thing with music when I'm listening to the bands. I will do the Qigongs in a dance form. And the whole point, again, we said before, the shall shoot. It's all about this interaction, but it's the for me, this sacred violence is respecting the violence, loving the violence, but not in an aggressive way, not in a harmful way, but understanding, knowing that the violence, like everything else, is your seafood, and it's there. When you appreciate it, you can learn from it, you can understand it, you can love it.
It's the same as sacred sexuality. I would like to touch back on sacred sexuality for a moment. When you orgasm, you reach no mind. You reach a state of nirvana for a moment, because there is no other thought in your brain. Men or women will tell you they have the same experience of all thought leaves their mind for a moment. That is an extremely holy and religious experience. Now, that doesn't mean that like you should go out and have sex with the next person that you see. Or that there shouldn't be respect and love, or that, you know, it hasn't been, sexuality hasn't been just as tortured and manipulated as violence has in our culture.
Exactly.
And so, you know, women with like, I don't know if anybody else has this experience, but generally women are more provocative with their clothes on because it has this like allure of mystery than seeing a naked woman, which actually is counterintuitive and confusing on a certain level, in my opinion, because like, she's got clothes on, but she's more attractive because they're playing us. They're using, you know, it's like movies. You watch a movie, they have us humans so figured out, I say them as a generalized cultural thing, that they know what music to play for a really sad scene in a movie that will stimulate you emotionally to feel sad about this thing that's happened. They have storytelling so well refined that they're playing you like a musical instrument. So we have to overcome that. We have to realize that they've taken something holy and they've tainted it and they've twisted it and they've turned it into something that is like a dark beast of what the pure holy thing was. But it's still the same beast. It's still the same animal. It's confused. It's full of rage. It's like Hulk. Hulk is an amazing example for this. He's, you know, like that's the perfect example for me of a being that has a state of consciousness that it wants to live in, but it's easily triggered into another state that it does not want to live in, but because of external forces that are pseudo beyond its control, because, I mean, you make the argument that we all chose to be born in this society at this time and these things. So pseudo beyond our control, but we still chose it. We have to deal with that. We have to try and transcend that. We have to learn discernment. And ultimately what this all boils down to, in my opinion, and why we have so much problem as a culture dealing with this and humans dealing with this in general, because every situation requires discernment. You can study sacred violence for years and you will still have to discern when the proper time for violence is. And that requires every moment you have to be conscious. Every moment you have to be able to discern. And it's not a baseline thing of if somebody takes a swing at you, then it's okay to hit them. It's not necessarily okay if someone takes a swing at you to hit them back. I've been in relationships with people who were almost half my body weight. I'm 6'4". I went out with a girl who was barely 5 foot and she slapped me in the face. I'm not going to hit her back because that would be the wrong time. That would be the wrong use of violence. Even though she hit me, I can justify it if I go by a baseline rule, and society is all about baseline rules. You have to be able to do this to get your driver's license. You have to be able to do this to pass 3rd grade. You have to be able to do this to get this job. And so ultimately, it's the generalization when everything needs to be about personal discernment. And the problem with personal discernment is it's not something that you can actively inflict on the masses. You cannot train the masses to have personal discernment. They have to care enough to have discernment. And I really think that is where one of the big issues comes from in all of this. Because it's like sexuality, you know? Let's take a really hot topic, prostitution, right? So prostitution, you sell your body for money. I do construction. Technically, I'm a prostitute. It's not sexual. I go to work. I get paid to do things for people with my body. I'm being a prostitute. That is the archetypical representation. Now, I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this are going, what? That's not true, and having this huge emotional reaction like I did the first time this theory was presented to me. But ultimately, it's whether sexual or not, that's just societal connotation. That's just a relationship that we have. Sexuality is one of the really hot key triggers in our society because of our Puritan ancestry. You know why I don't know if it's this way in the UK, but in America, we say light meat and dark meat for chicken. You know, the thighs and the wings are dark meat. It's because you didn't say thigh. Thigh was such an offensive word that you couldn't say thigh without, oh, you said thigh, or breast. Oh my God, he said breast. It was a huge thing at the time because that's how society had been trained, and that was the current context of the time. So if we step back from that context, if we step back from these preconceived notions that society has put in our head, is there anything wrong with prostitution? It happens in nature. Bonobos do it. The bonobo chimpanzees, you can go online. I don't know where it is, but I've seen it in a documentary, an animal about I think it was Discovery Channel or National Geographic or something, where the bonobo monkeys, who are one of our closest relations, and their whole culture is based on sex. There's footage of a male monkey walking up to a female with a bunch of grapes, handing her the bunch of grapes, and then she allows him to have sex with her. So really, to me, that brings up the question of, is this just something that we've been trained with? That this is wrong to do. And I'm not condoning prostitution. Don't condone prostitution. Never have. Don't think I ever will, because I have some baggage about it. But ultimately, is it really, it's just a concept that we have been given by our culture. And to me, if you have a concept that's been given to you by your culture, it needs to be questioned. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be considered, because our culture tells us other things, like homosexuality is not okay. But we know it's fine. We know there's nothing wrong with it. So where are the dogmas? You know, we have to hunt out these dogmas. But ultimately, that all goes back to discernment of when and what style of prostitution is acceptable. Because if someone's selling their body for drugs to get their needs met, that's not really optimal for anybody. But if someone wants to do somebody a sexual favor because they did something nice for them and they know they'll appreciate it, then is there anything really wrong with that? Or is that just the story that we're telling ourselves that, no, you shouldn't have done that because it's sexual nature and we have this predetermined relationship to sexual things? So I guess it's becoming about sacred sex too. All right, I'm done for now. Somebody else's turn. Go.
No, but I'll have to add that afterwards, you know, sacred violence / sacred sex. Well, right. Sex and violence, you know.
Sex and violence. Well, why do you think they're so popular? Because they're the things that make the world go round, and they're the things that we're not allowed to openly deal with. To openly look at. What, Boggie?
Actually, I will add that. Did you know that there was a big thing, many things I've studied, psychology, but there was also a thing in about violence, actually, in the psychology I studied. And there's a big thing actually in war, but when I first studied it, I was actually looking at like psychopaths, and there's one of the big things, one of the most notorious things, there was psychopathic couples that were doing these hideous like murders, but it would arouse them so much, they would kill somebody, and then it aroused them so much that they would, you know, then go and have sex. And one of the biggest things, you look actually into history and war, one of the most notorious things was, you know, Vietnam was very much known for it. It was in the Second World War, and all wars during history. You go back as many wars, you would find brothels and you know, whorehouses, sex houses right near the battlefields, because there's actually within the psychology is that when you're faced with death, when you're literally staring death in the face. The body, the natural hormones want to say, make babies, and you go into this process of very soon afterwards of actually wanting to, this needing this urge, this sexual urge to be fulfilled, and this is. Yeah, this is in a way this whole thing about people saying about having arguments, and they love having an argument for the make-up sex because there's this natural thing of the yin and yang. There's, in essence, that is a reverse of sacred violence into sacred sex. Is the whole thing is that one actually transforms into the other. It is the natural flow, and it's only like I say, my philosophy, if I ruled the world, one of the three things I would want to introduce, I would want to introduce better education into food, learning about not only about food, but also how your body processes food. Because a lot of people learn about food and nutrition, but what they don't actually understand is actually how your stomach works, how your intestinal tract works, why actually eating lots of acidic fruit or fruit with meat and also carbs, as in spaghetti bolognese, it's actually not the best thing to do, but actually separating them would be better. So, food I would teach, but also I would want to teach meditation, self-healing, but I'd also want to teach martial arts. And people, this whole thing with sacred violence. Martial arts is all about fighting. No, as I've said, and I'm not going to say it, there is another side to it. In fact, there's a very balanced in the three M's, especially in internal martial arts. You have the three M's: martial, medical, and meditational. And it is known that you have to have these balanced. The martial side, on one side in wartime, it's fighting. I just realised I'm looking at the wrong camera. I've got two cameras here. In wartime, it is fighting, but in peacetime, it's about personal development. It's about fitness. It's about, again, and sparring then becomes about understanding another person. It's another way of communicating with those people. So martial arts, when done correctly, when done in accordance to the three M's, martial arts is sacred violence. It is this understanding that, in essence, what you're actually, the problem is, if we called this show Sacred Play, you would have less reaction than calling it sacred violence. Is the fact that we call it sacred violence, straight away you're going to get people's back up. It's like if you, instead of saying sacred sex, you'd say, the art of bonding with the one you love, which is basically, I don't know, one of the ways to bond with the one you love is have sex. But you don't call it sex, or at least, the old corny saying, I don't have sex, I make love. It's the whole thing of changing the word, changes the energy, the tone, the frequency of it. And this is the issue, especially people who don't like the violence of the world. And yeah, I think there's a lot of violence, but it's the wrong violence. And like I say, maybe I wouldn't personally use the word violence. And I've always agreed with Ethan. It's just my one little thing would be because I know people's reaction to the word. And, when I sent this out, there's some people who said, sacred violence? What? And it's like, yeah, because your reaction to that word, you're having an emotional reaction to the word. But the actual subject itself is something that's, when you look into ancient cultures, they have been practicing it, since the dawn of time. It's just they didn't call it sacred violence. It was called something else. It was part of the ritual. It was part of the dance. It was something else. You didn't use that word, but that's what it is.
It wasn't removed. Like that's the thing. Like sexuality, sex. Like we're trying to act like we're not animals. So we have to remove. We make love. We don't have sex. We have sex. We can do it with loving feelings behind it or without loving feelings behind it. But we have sex just like the monkeys do. You know.
I'll quickly add. I'll just quickly add, if you don't mind. Is like the whole thing in what Chris is learning from me is the whole thing of Qi, Jing, and Shen. Is the energies of the body in the Tao, and one of it's many different philosophies or sects in Taoism, and one of them is the three ones. The three ones goes into the three ends and also goes into, so the part of the three ones is Qi, Jing, and Shen. Three energies that exist within your body. Qi is physical vitality, Jing is emotional vitality, and Shen is spiritual vitality, but spirit starts out thought and ends up into psychic abilities. Now, Jing on one side starts off as passion. It is, pure sex, passion. You've only got to. I worked I worked close protection and as a doorman, for many years, and you just got to go to nightclubs, and it's all, people say, we're not animals. Yes, we are. You go to nightclubs, and it's all about sexual attraction. It's all about the predators and the prey, and it's all about, and the predators can be as much the females as it is the males, and vice versa. And it's all this interaction. It's all this play. But it's because we've lost that respect for it that it suddenly becomes something a little bit sordid. And it's the same with the violence, is that, it's become this, we're doing this for this. And you're losing, you go back to ancient cultures, there was a big thing of ceremony before going off to war, to send love and respect, is that, very much there was very much about the sacredness, going off to war, and in one way that's betrayed if you're a bit of a Trekkie, a bit of a Star Trek fan, is the whole Klingons. The Klingons are very much the warlike people, but it is a ritual, and there is a sacredness about how they act, how they, it's a good day to die, and it's an honor to do it. And, I'm not going that point, but the whole point of there is sacredness to play, to this, play that, play fighting is a form of violence, but it's play fighting, it's an interaction. And that's what, for me, that's the one thing I just want to emphasize, just want to bring in. Now, before I let Ethan talk, because he's been quiet for some time, Chris, have you got anything to add or any questions to ask while we shut up for a change?
Earlier on, Ethan was talking about validating theories against nature. And I was just wondering if you had a good example of where there was a violence in nature that was sacred, but there was a learning from it as well.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. The first example that comes to mind for me would be when you see males fighting over females in herd cultures, where you'll see a young buck challenge the old buck. Let's use deer because it's a great example, or any herbivore along those lines, reindeer, caribou, whatever. You'll see them, if you watch the interaction that they have with the elder, they're learning how to fight. They're learning how to so what I'm looking for, postulate. So like how to make themselves puff up, how to look bigger, how to look more ferocious. You see like young cubs play fighting, and they're practicing for when they have to fight for later. Like a den of coyote pups, for instance. The coyote pups will fight each other and play and wrestle around. And what they're doing is they're learning the mechanics for if the push ever comes to shove, as the saying goes, and they actually have to defend themselves. You're seeing like Young cats. Here's a great example. Young cats will when they'll reach a certain age, kind of their tweenage years, like between, if they were human, maybe 13, 12-ish, where they'll hunch up their back and all their hair will stand up, and they're kind of playing and they're experimenting with the reaction that they get by puffing themselves up, because animals do that whole thing of whoever's bigger wins. That's the whole idea behind the king cobra's hood. Animals hair puffing up, the puffer fish, all of those things is they're trying to make themselves larger, make their energy larger, and intimidate the other person, because ultimately that's what it comes down to. Is in conflict, whoever's energy is stronger will win. If you ever do a lot of internal martial arts and qigong and things like that, and you really experiment with dogs, I've done this with dogs. A dog can come charging at you barking. If you can make your energy more powerful than the dog, whether you bellow at the dog, whether you expand your aura, whatever the case may be, that dog will back down, because it thinks it will lose the energetic conflict, which, because they're not thinking of things purely on the physical realm, they will relate to it in that way. So you can see the passage of wisdom, you can see the experimenting in the safe place, the sacred play manifest in the young who are experimenting with their environment and with their being and their bodies, and how that relates to other things in nature. And that's why you see like young cubs playing with different animals, like chasing butterflies, or different birds experimenting with fluffing their feathers up and trying to intimidate and frighten each other in a playful way, because that's the practice that they're doing. One of my favorite scientific explanations of dreams is along the same lines, where dreams allow you to run through life in a safe situation, where you can practice running away from the lion in your dreams, because it's a lot easier than practice running away from your lion in real life. So those would be the examples that I would probably cite, is that the ability to learn. And I know I grew up watching a lot of nature shows. Just to fill you in for a second, a lot of people who watch this probably know this. I'm dyslexic and autistic. I was homeschooled. I didn't learn how to read till I was about 12. I went to preschool, which you only go to till about 5, which is daycare. And then I didn't go back to formal schooling until I was about 16. And that was just to try and get a piece of paper that I ended up not getting. So my perspective on these things is based on watching a lot of animal shows, a lot of National Geographic and things like that. And it's something that you see very clearly illustrated in there is the young buck who challenges the male and gets his fucking ass kicked because he doesn't have the experience. But as time goes by, he will come back and he will challenge the male again. And eventually he will win, because eventually he will have accrued enough knowledge and enough personal power to overcome the other being who is stepping out of their attachment to the body. Because ultimately that's what age does. That's why when you get old, in my opinion, your body starts to break down. Joseph Campbell talks about this in some of his books, is because when you're young, you're all about your body. You're so connected to your body that if something comes in contact with you that threatens you, it threatens your sense of self. But the older you get, the more pain you have, the more you learn to disassociate yourself from your body. And then you realize more and more the truth, which is you are not this body. You are a being inside of this body. You are the consciousness operating a robot that's extremely well made, that again, humans being humans, we try to imitate what Creator has done, even though we can't. So we make robots, we make cars, we make machines, because ultimately we are a machine. We're an extremely well put together, biodegradable, regenerating machine that is controlled by the consciousness that operates it. So I think, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, but I also wanted to say something, since we were talking about sacred sex and sacred violence, and how violence and sex, when in war times, go so well together. It's base chakra stuff. Your base chakras are your sexuality, and that has to do with your sense of safety as well. So when your sense of safety is threatened, it reminds you of your aliveness. It reminds you of your humanness. And what an amazing way to feel your humanness after your sense of self has been threatened than to go and have sex, than to have an orgasm, to experience the best, one of the most powerful experiences that humans can have is an orgasm, is to have sex, is to experience the on the greater energetic level, this is, since it's kind of about sacred sex now a little bit, I'll talk about this for a minute, which is the yin and yang of sex, right? So men we are definitely yang in sex. We are the power that is inserting. We are penetrating. We are not yielding. We have a hard on. We have a dick. That's how it works. I believe if you look up the origin of the word vagina, it actually means sword sheath in Roman or Greek. I think. Don't 100% on that. But you look at now, for me, what I found very interesting is studying women and women's sexuality. And also this carries all the way, I'll say this, and then I'll talk about how it carries over. So women yielding, opening, they have to allow men inside them. That is, we are putting it's like sticking your hand into a bucket of water. Not a big deal, right? What about if you tried to drink that whole bucket of water? What if you tried to allow that bucket of water inside of you and you had to trust that it would take care of you and not hurt you and violate you? Totally different set of needs, totally different energy represented. And you see that represented in how women are turned on. Women aren't turned on by, hey, that's cute, I want to put my dick in it. Women are turned on by things like sensitivity, compassion, respect, because those are what they need to experience that energy that they are archetypically representing. And one of my favorite examples that I've seen, thank you, nature, is you look at homosexual men. Why are homosexual men so effeminate? Why are they that way? Because, not to get too graphic, they have a lot of times a similar experience to the experience that women are having. They have to be open and be willing to be penetrated by a force and to trust that that force will love and respect their needs and not take advantage of that and violate them. So that is, to me, a lot of times why you see gay men being more open, more effeminate, more honest about their feelings, is because they have had to look inside of themselves and come to terms with that side of themselves that is open to doing that is open to being penetrated, to look at their inner yin and their inner ability to receive love. Because that's what they have to do to be able to be okay with performing those acts, which is something that is very common as a part of homosexuality. So I think that was basically everything I was going to say. And yeah, as far as the whole war thing goes, I did Civil War reenacting for 4 years as part of my schooling when I was growing up. And that's one of the things that a bunch of Civil War reenactors get really mad about is the floozy trains that used to follow the armies. Because if you're putting your life on the line, why wouldn't you want to get laid afterward? I mean, if you're going to potentially die, a lot of scruples go along the side. I know I've had that in a few situations where I thought I wasn't going to be around much longer, and after that, for a couple of weeks, I was like, hey, I just am going to enjoy the hell out of being human because that's what we're here to do. And also I would like to touch on this for a moment, of denial of sexuality. So let's look at the 7 deadly sins, right? They're all basically things that all humans do. So if you take things that all humans do and you make them bad, you take the animal side of yourself and you turn it into a demon, you turn it into a monster. The gods of the old religion become the demons of the new. The old pagan gods were the gods of fertility. So like Pan. Pan looks an awful lot like the devil. But that was the old god, was the god of fertility, because that was the god that everybody worshipped, because the fertile earth was the most powerful thing in the world. You look at the women giving birth. Men, the closest thing we can experience to giving birth is having a kidney stone. But you look at our relationship, the women, they are holding a being inside of themselves for 9 months. They are manifesting a being. They are holding something deep in the womb of yin, and allowing that to be its own being and to nurture it and to love it and then to release it to the world. That requires an awful lot of introspection. That requires an awful lot of acceptance of self and love and nurturing that men don't have. And I absolutely believe that it's represented by the genitals and how they manifest in the world and how sex manifests in the world. Because the more I see of nature, the more I study things, the more I realize that it's all the same. and it all has archetypical representations of an energy. So that's how a lot of the old magics work too. Is like for a fertility dance for the natives, they would jump the same height that they would want their corn to grow, because they were setting an imprint in the holograph. Now, if you get into holographic theory, there's research that's been done where if you take a sick plant and you put it next to a healthy plant, the sick plant will emanate the healthy plant's energetic signature and become more healthy because it's being shown, it's remembering how to be what it was born to be when it has forgotten to a certain extent because of whatever
thing. Sorry, mate, very quickly.
No,
there's a whole thing of there's actually these new experiments coming out where they're actually with using a laser, they're beaming the laser light into the healthy plant, then bouncing it off or reflecting it. Then with that protection of the healthy plant, they're firing it into the cells of the ill plant. Or there was what was it, tumorous coffee beans, or there's basically a tumor. This plant had a tumor, and they fired energy into the tumor. It's very similar to what you say in the past about an illness is basically it's the cancer has forgotten what its job is.
Yeah.
And they're firing this laser light of the healthy plant into the sick one, into the tumor cell, and that tumor literally was then transformed. It would then grow into a healthy plant. It was literally transformed. So yeah, it's exactly what you're saying. So carry on.
Actually, I was about done. I mean,
okay.
You got any more questions? You're good at this question thing. What else you got for us?
I'm trying to look for a word because, like, in the discussion that when Boggie's talking about the yin, you've got at one end you've got passion, and then at the other one, I can't remember what the other word is now, but
compassion.
It's compassion. Thank you. But with what we've been talking about today, you've got at one end you've got the play, and at the other end you've got violence, which is the overall capture. So would you say you've got play and excess or action? What would be that word to encapsulate the opposite of the play?
Right, let me just can you say that again, or just when you say encapsulate, what do you mean?
Well, basically, you've got the yin and the yang, the opposites. You've got the play, and then you've got the
the opposite of play. In essence, because the whole thing when we're talking about the yin and the yang, when we're talking, this is Tai Chi. Like Chris knows about this. I can wrap it on for 2 hours, or I have, about just this alone. And the whole point is that when people talk about, they say, "Oh, this is yin yang." No, that's yin, that's yang. You can have a whole circle of yang and a whole circle of yin. When it's exactly down the middle, the yin yang is opposing opposites. So if on the opposing side, when you're talking about play, then the opposing opposite of play is violence, because play is the sacred violence. Play is this where there is love in there. There's love. It's playful. You have the thoughts, you have the idea, and you have the love, the unconditional love to play. The idea is not to hurt the person. The idea is to have fun. It's to play. The whole point of play fighting. And or at least for me, I remember growing up with certain people saying, you got to stop that play fighting because you'll only end up hurting each other. So you're actually saying, no, you should not have sacred violence. You should not have sacred play, because sooner or later you end up hurting each other, and therefore, then it's just violence, and you're missing the point. So does that answer your question?
It is. What I was visualising it as is the sliding scale with, as Baz would say, the tilting point, where you go over from play and you lose the playfulness and you go into the violence side. Well,
yeah. Because the playfulness, it's basically that sacredness. What we're talking about is that as soon as you, or maybe another way of saying it is respect. As soon as you lose the respect, not for the other person, it's the respect for the play itself. So that's it. In essence, this is why, see, in martial arts, we don't call it play fighting, we call it sparring. It's but there's a difference between sparring and fighting. Fighting's fighting. No, oh, you're fighting. No, we're sparring. Well, what's the difference? I've heard a lot of people say. Well, the difference is when I'm sparring, it's controlled. The idea is to learn from that situation. When it's fighting, I'll knock you blooming.
It's about the discernment.
Yeah.
And the intention.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately what it all comes back down to always is discernment and intention. Discernment in the situation and the intention behind it.
Very much. So maybe that's that tipping point is intention. The intention, the discernment, where it goes from something that's play and respected play, something that's loving, to violence. And I think, I used to have an issue with it, with what I'm about to say. And what I'm about to say is that this thing about like movies and there's too much violence on TV, and because I used to say no, is that me and my brother grew up on Rambo and all these films and whatnot, and we haven't taken it too far. We didn't become hooligans and thugs, but the reason we didn't was because we had the martial arts side. We had this side of respect, that there's this point that you take the play up to a point, it's play. You go past that point, it then becomes violence. So that intention, that discernment is of knowing where that point is, which I think in sort of what you're saying is this thing of play, instead of saying sacred violence or sacred violence or play to violence, is that it's that point. You have to understand where it gets too much. I think because we should be wrapping up, not quite yet, but soon. That thing of like Ethan said it about this. There's one thing I used to get a lot. Is a lot of people knew I did. A lot of people knew I did martial arts, and which is in America and Canada. This is actually quite normal. But I did ice hockey, which in Britain is quite a small thing. Not everybody skates, let alone plays hockey. And I was in the enforcer in ice hockey, and the whole idea is, for me, I wasn't an enforcer for the violence. I was an enforcer to give my team the opportunity to win. Because if somebody was a scorer and not a fighter, I would step in. And for me, right. There's a thing in judo. I'll try to explain it this way. It's a thing in martial arts in general, but there's this very poignant thing in judo. The biggest thing you learn in judo is how to fall. You'll learn how to be thrown. And the whole point of that is if you know how to be thrown, then you can never be hurt. And so what my teacher taught, my Sifu taught, was how to get hit. If you know how to get hit, then you'll have no fear of being hit because you can't get hurt unless it's in a certain way or to a great extent. So the idea was he started off with a quick, if I asked too many questions or didn't practice enough or didn't do certain things, I'd get the backhand, or back of the hand, either on the body, on the arm, on the head. But as I progressed, as I got more further into the system, it went from the back of a hand to a fist to a chop to an elbow, eventually being a stick to a steel bar. And of course, when people hear that, you see their face of, oh, this is terrible. But when you know how to take the hit, then it's no longer a fear. It's no longer the violence there. So the reason I said this was the whole fact of, like, in relationships, you know, people say, oh, you know, you should watch him, he's a martial artist, he'll hit you. Or, yeah, and it's like, no, I've never hit any of my partners ever. I stopped. I paused on, because I'd say I never hit a woman. I've hit a female martial artist in a competition, and then people say, oh, that's the same thing. I said, no, because the respect is there. The respect, we're in, you know, the ring, we're in training, and we're learning about how to deal with that situation. So in that situation, yes, I have sparred, changing the word slightly because of the negative to certain words. I've sparred with women. In actual fact, one of my most famous, I've got two famous defeats, me being defeated. And my most favourite was being totally mullered by a blind guy who did a keto. It was absolutely the most awesome thing I've ever experienced, because he was literally sensing the air. He knew what was going on. That I couldn't get anywhere near him without him already knowing that I was there. He was fully aware. And the other famous defeat, my favourite defeat, was by a Taiwan kickboxer, female kickboxer, and basically her one leg was my two legs put together, and it was an open art competition. It's a competition in China, and in China, the open art competitions is you either knock them out the ring or knock them out. That's how you win. You know, it's quite simple. You either get knocked out or you get knocked out of the ring. And it was the only time that I actually tagged out. Tagged out meaning hit the ground, say I give up. Is that basically she got me in a situation where she went to like a style of roundhouse kick. I ducked, came back, and then she leaped, and basically her legs wrapped around my neck. I'm on the floor. I'm looking up, thinking, if this wasn't a martial art competition, this wouldn't be a bad way to go. And I had to tap out. It was one of the only times I tapped out. And she had me. She had me full, you know, and it was, you know, this whole thing of, you know, this strong, powerful woman, you know, in this situation where I was trained to be pummeled to, not to death, but I was trained to be pummeled. I'm used to being, most funniest thing I actually will say is that one ex-partner did sort of try to test this theory that I said that I would never hit a woman, and she loved arguments, and you know, we got into a situation, we got in an argument. I actually lost my temper, which is rare, and I lost my temper, and I hit the cupboard, put my fist through the door. It's the nearest to violence in a relationship I got. I hit the cupboard. She was so peed off that I hit the cupboard. She picked up a frying pan, whacked it over my head, and broke the frying pan because I hit her cupboard. And you know, that's the nearest to violence I ever got of sorts. But you know, so this whole thing of, you know, is that when you appreciate, as a martial artist, when you appreciate violence, you know how to ride that wave, that surf. And I think there is so much violence in the world because people don't know how to channel that energy, how to appreciate it, how to understand it, and here comes the big one, how to love it, how to know that, you know, well, love it as in it's your seafood. You know, that anger, you know, when, you know, as you said, you know, anger is a, you know, things like worry. There's a whole Taoist thing. Don't worry, because, you know, if you're worrying about something you could do something about, what's the point of worrying about it? Do what you got to do. If you're worrying about something where there's nothing you can do whatsoever, what's the point of worrying? You know, and with the anger, and, you know, anger is channel that into something. anger. Lividness comes from the liver. In five element theory, it's the liver. There is excessive energy in the liver, and then you become livid. So the Taoist point of view is the reason you're getting angry is that you have excess energy within your body. So you need to channel it. You need to redirect it. Now, eventually, the energy terms is that you learn to use the five elements, so you never get to that point. So you never get to that point of being angry. But while it's there, the point of sacred violence, martial arts, in what I prefer to say, sacred play, is you learn to channel that energy in a safe environment where you can use discernment and use it in the right way, rather than trying to ignore it, trying to pretend it's not there, or let it build up to a point. If you let it build up like a volcano, you'll explode. Hence why violence in society and relationships, where it can build and build and build, and it goes too far. If you go the other way, where you try to ignore it, that violence will. Some spiritual people, not all, but some spiritual people say, "Oh, I don't, violence, I'm into love, but I hate this. I hate the government. I hate McDonald's. I hate this." That is emotional violence, right there. If you're all about peace and love, but you hate this, you hate that, you're the whole point in the Taoist concept, especially a person called Sun Tzu, or Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, The Art of Strategy. Your enemy is an unknown friend. Is that the idea is that you become friends with your enemy, and there's a big thing in Shiatsu, Japanese massage, of an old story where a woman comes to this grandmaster in Shiatsu, and she says, "I hate my stepmother. My mother-in-law. Absolutely hate her with a passion. She causes me nothing but problems. Can you help me kill her?" And the grandmaster says, "Okay, I will give you this secret recipe, this secret oil, but you have to massage this oil into your mother-in-law every single day for the next 9 months." She goes, okay, I will do that. And so she starts, she said, I'll go and massage her mother-in-law. She keeps doing it, and she starts talking to her. She has to. She's massaging the blooming woman. And she talks, and starts, from this interaction, she starts actually getting fond of her, to the point where eventually she has to go to the Grandmaster and says, "I've made a terrible mistake. All this time I've been massaging, my mother-in-law. I've actually got to like her. She's actually quite nice. How do I stop this poison from killing her?" And the Grandmaster turns around and says, "What poison?" Because the point is that he's going, okay, let's channel this into something else. So when you don't channel that energy, instead of being play, it becomes violence. Goes from yin into yang, or yang into yin, depending which way you want to see it. So if you don't channel that energy, it will become something else. It will become violence rather than sacred violence. Does that make sense?
I'm going to add really quick, that's why drunk people get so mad. Because you drink, you're messing with your liver chi, and then you're going to stir up all of this anger that's already in your liver. Everybody knows everybody knows at least one person who drinks and gets angry and then does violent things that they ordinarily wouldn't do.
But they don't know why. That's the whole point. And when you study the 5-element foods and all 5-element theory, when you then understand what alcohol goes to the liver and the kidneys, but especially the liver, it's processed through the liver, and the liver is all about lividness. It's yin, it's negativity side is lividness. It's this anger, and it's and then it goes, when people talk about alcoholics, killing their liver. It's that, and then wonder where all this anger's coming from. It's in the liver. The liver's screaming at you, and that's the point. Yeah, and that's one of the connections.
Totally.
Okay, Chris, have you got any other questions? I think we should wrap it up.
No.
I'll just check. Well, okay, before Chris asks a question that means we're going to be here for another year. Chris, you've got to see if you're back next Thursday. I think you're good, a good thing for us. You add some questions we wouldn't think of. Right, we got a few people watching. Do you have any questions? If you're on YouTube, there is a question board right there. Please ask. I did put one myself saying, got any questions, please ask. So if there's any statements or questions you want to ask, please do. Otherwise, Chris, do you have a question?
No, genuinely, I'm out of questions at the moment.
By Jove. Really? God, blimey.
We get a pretty exhaustive segment on everything there. In the sacred sex, sacred violence, sacred food. Yeah, there was a pretty comprehensive list.
Well, it is me and Ethan. Only me and Ethan can go from sacred violence to sacred sex to sacred food. But actually, they're all interlinked anyway. So
yeah, as far as I'm concerned, those are like the three best parts about being human.
Well, let's say I changed the violence to play, but yeah, the three best things I like as well. Yeah, so
yeah, the three treasures. I mean, how can you go wrong?
Indeed, the free ones all over again. Okay, so I think we will wrap it up then. I had a quick look. No, nobody's left any questions. I say at the moment we've only got about 2 or 3 people, but I know when I actually look at it, once it's done, there'll be about at least 10, because that's what normally happens. And then within less than a week, this will build up to about 30, at least 30 or 50 people.
Yeah.
So next week we have, let me quickly have a look. We have, please forgive me, Daniel, if I say your surname wrong. We have Daniel Alcleone, or Alcleone, and it will be about integration of mind, body, and spirit. That is yeah, exactly. I was like, woo! Oh, what's this? Oh, cool. We have got it's a statement rather than a question from somebody me and Ethan knows, Buffy, Ninja One. And she says, great discussion, put so much into perspective that I was completely unaware of. Thank you. You're welcome. Yeah, I think that was the whole point. Very much indeed. So, good. Thank you. Well, thank you for that. And so, yes, next week, we have another guest whose name I've forgotten already. Please forgive me, Daniel. I know it's Daniel. It's your second name I'm struggling with. And we might even have Chris next week. Don't know yet. Might we, Chris?
Might do.
Okay, cool. Right, so until then, it's goodbye from me. It's goodbye from Ethan.
Bye.
It's goodbye from Chris.
Bye.
Bye. So, take care, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Speak again soon. If you've got any questions, if you've got any things you'd like, if we do another one like this, if there's anything you'd like us to talk about, why don't you leave comments on the YouTube? Let us know. So take care. Bye for now. Love, Chi and Shen from us 3. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.